Benedict Arnold was a traitor of the American Revolution, but not in the way you might think. The 13 members of Congress and the states they represented were notorious for gobbling up loyalist land and money. Wherever an American showed continued loyalty to the British, they were hanged or chased out of town, and they lost everything. This was basically Joseph Reed's job. Reed was a lawyer who was living in the seized manor of Grace Galloway, an old woman whose husband had been convicted as a loyalist. Joseph Reed led Congress on a witch hunt against Benedict Arnold. And when I say witch hunt, I want to make it clear that most of the charges against Arnold were fully made up. All 13 charges were embellished, and some were just silly. Take being ungracious to a militiaman, for instance, or preferring loyalist company to patriots. The two real charges, those that stuck despite having no evidence, Benedict Arnold acknowledged. Those two were, 1, allowing a ship to leave Philadelphia while the port was closed, because Arnold had money invested in it, and 2, using public wagons to move trade goods. And again, he was being accused by Joseph Reed. Reed, who had vacationed in enemy-occupied territory 3 years earlier when it looked like Washington might not win the assault on Trenton, just in case Reed needed to sneak off and join the British if Washington lost. During the trial, Arnold tried to reach out to Washington for help, but Joseph Reed had anticipated this. Reed threatened Washington that he wouldn't call up the Pennsylvania militia to reinforce Washington's war effort if he wasn't given time to dig up dirt on Benedict Arnold. So Washington stayed on the sidelines. Eventually, Washington would come forward, but not to defend his friend Arnold against Joseph Reed in Congress. Washington would come forward to use Arnold's defection to the British as a rallying point. Washington would publicly, in the presses and in speeches, turn Arnold into the Judas of the colonial army. Washington, who had received letter after letter from Arnold warning that he was near his breaking point, called Arnold's defection treason of the blackest dye. Washington even encouraged anti-Arnold parades in Philadelphia, where anything Benedict Arnold had ever done to help the American cause was rewritten or destroyed. A few weeks after Arnold's treason, Washington would send an agent, John Champ, to try to recapture Arnold so he would be tried and hanged in public, to add to the anti-Arnold, pro-American fervor. That's a lot of action from a general who couldn't be bothered to help his friend during a trumped-up trial just a few months earlier.
You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Lemense, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-daw on the internet and get to the facts. Reading through Benedict Arnold's letters, one gets the sense that he wore his heart on his sleeve. As we'll discuss, every word Arnold spoke on the battlefield seemed to be an honest, knee-jerk reaction. Good or bad, the man just didn't seem capable of censoring his thoughts, or ambitions, or annoyances. So what if we all live like that? What if we are all more impulsive? Or worse, what if we couldn't lie? Kind of like the Jim Carrey movie, Liar, Liar. Did you know there's a name for that kind of honesty? It was pioneered by the psychotherapist Brad Blanton, and it involves telling the truth, no matter who it hurts. Today, we want to know, what would that look like? What if Todd and I practice radical honesty? To answer that question, we have 3 myths. Myth 1. Why do we even lie as humans? Wouldn't our lives be better if we were just all straight shooters? Myth 2. What about our relationships? Wouldn't our marriages be sublime if we had to say what we thought when asked, does this make me look fat? Myth 3. What about our personal finances? Or the business world? How would it look if CEOs had to stand in front of Congress and instead of answering, 90 different ways, they had to admit, yeah, we knew we were gathering data on everybody, but we got so rich, guys. It was awesome. We'll get to our myths. But first, I want to tell Todd about some of Arnold's heartbreakingly honest letters. Have you ever found somebody's letters, like if you're going through an old shoebox or a memoir or something?
I have grandparents. And
have you ever gotten one where you read it and it just feels a little bit too intimate? You're like, keep it down, man.
Oh, yeah. I read one that was from a very, some kind of affair from the good old days.
Oh, an affair letter.
A juicy one, yeah.
Oh, that would be fun to read.
Made you look at everybody. Some of them weren't around anymore, but made them look at you a little differently. You were young and lustful once. Yeah. It's romantic, the paper and the postmark and everything. Even the stamp is interesting, right? It's just dated.
Right. Anyone who doesn't think letters are important, go write one to your significant other and watch them react to that. So if what Todd's explaining, like, or at least hitting on the emotional interest of finding a letter that is controversial, charged, full of somebody's heart. You read it and you actually start to feel for somebody. I read through a bunch of Benedict Arnold's letters, and when we first started studying for this episode, I was looking for clues that he was like a conniving Machiavellian spy. We've done a bunch of episodes about cunning schemers and getting behind what their actions are and what they really meant, and Machiavelli himself and Da Vinci trying to steal a river. That was a great episode. This one I got the opposite. Every one of his letters, I felt sorry for him. Even when he was being cunning or clever, I still felt sorry because it was so emotional. Todd, could I possibly beg you to read a bit of one of his letters? He used to write his first wife before she died, basically begging to get replies. Like he was bored off at war, and he was like, please just write me more.
I thought you fired or suspended me from my voiceover activities.
We're going to have you back on a trial period pending pending your review. No, I'm kidding.
Dearest one, I am now in the greatest anxiety and suspense, not knowing whether to write to the living or the dead. Not having heard the least syllable from you this 4 months. I wrote you almost every post somehow. My dearest life, you cannot imagine the troubled fatigue I've gone through since here. I shall be very unhappy if I have not the pleasure of hearing you and our dear ones are well. My heart is anxious and aching.
So if this was a Ken Burns documentary, I think Todd has the job.
Well, it's emotional. This is not, you think of this person being a rich, successful, powerful politician, warrior, right?
Being that he's billed as a mega spy and traitor, I was expecting all of his letters to not be vulnerable. Like they're all super vulnerable and super honest. We talked about one where he was talking to Washington. It was during the witch hunt that we are covering today, in today's episode, where Congress and Joseph Reed were trying to ruin his reputation. I know we read this I think our first episode. Would you mind reading this one again? This is May 5th, 1779. This is Benedict Arnold begging George Washington to step in and help him during this trial.
If your excellency thinks me a criminal, For heaven's sake, let me be immediately tried, and if found guilty, executed.
So that kind of hard on the sleeve talk, that doesn't show up so much in like Machiavelli's letters. Or if you look at, clever spies or extremely clever historical figures, they usually kind of play their cards closer to the vest than that.
Yeah, Machiavellian was like, drown the babies,
Right.
Dun, 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 dun. No, there was no heart-wrenching.
No, he wasn't
beg
messaging
you.
his wife begging for letters because he is bored and like heartsick. I also really got a sense. So if anyone thinks that it was a big surprise that Arnold was disliked by Congress, by Joseph Reed, that anyone had it out for him, he basically used this radical honesty to piss off higher ups just left and right. He angered people he worked with. He angered other generals. One of the generals, Horatio Gates, actually sort of like got him to throw down, like stirred him into sort of a confrontation that he couldn't come back from reputation wise. This is after he had taken Fort Ticonderoga. So when Arnold gets his leg crippled, he is basically about to charge a British redoubt. A redoubt is a big fort, basically. They've got two redoubts, and Arnold is pissed. Like he can't keep it in. Like I said, all of his comments basically are knee jerks. And Horatio Gates is a general who used to basically work for the British. And he is very, very upset that Horatio Gates, a general who is like not willing to commit all of his forces, kind of has the British on the run, like they're fleeing back to these redoubts. So he has effectively won the battle, but he just doesn't want to commit all his forces. So we're going to get into a little bit of detail here. So he fights with Gates. Gates won't commit his forces, and he disobeys the general basically in public. Basically, if you think of any Hollywood movie where a battlefield commander doesn't want to move to action and somebody slugs them and decides to take the consequences anyway, this is effectively the move that Arnold makes.
You coward.
Yeah.
I think Gates might have been onto something, though.
He might have been.
He's from there. He knows how badass they are.
That's kind of exactly what happens. Is Horatio Gates used to work with the British, like he was a Brit.
Right.
He didn't think the Americans would be able to stand up to the mighty British infantry. He was of the opinion that the Americans were rabble, which they were. They were an ad hoc collection of yokels with guns, which they were. And he just didn't want to commit all of his forces to a charge. Even though Gates outnumbered the British, he was hesitant. So when Arnold confronts him, he says, quote, "By God, I will soon put an end to it." And then Arnold charges in with 3,000 men into the battlefield. And he felt he could end the battle. Like he was a talented general, Arnold was. He was a good leader. And so did a man named Captain Wakefield. But Gates ignored Arnold, ignored his advice, and withdrew.
That doesn't sound like a traitor to me. That sounds like a war hero.
Right. It does. That when I say traitor, it really is just more of he made a lot of enemies and people didn't like him. But yeah, that sounds like a man who really, really, really wants America to win and is disobeying anybody who thinks that the militia and the Americans don't have the grit to do this.
I can't imagine it's very common for someone to take over your post, is it?
No, it was more or less... if somebody with the battlefield experience of Horatio Gates said, "We can't do it," pretty much everybody under him would have just agreed. They would have taken his experience to heart. Arnold was so gung-ho that when he was getting ready to go on march, he told a justice of the peace that none but Almighty God shall prevent my marching. So he really wanted to lead. So let's talk a little bit about how that goes for Arnold. This fly into battle, saber, like he was literally whirling a saber in the air to scare the crap out of the British. He was on horse. When you see images of Napoleon, and we know that they're made up, like his horse is rearing, he's got a saber in hand, he's screaming, he looks wild and heroic. This was actually Arnold. We have historical accounts and journals saying Arnold actually did that.
Red-eyed, I'm going to see you guys in hell.
Right.
Very Braveheart.
It totally is. As I read through this, it doesn't sound like a traitor. This sounds like this is the movie version of Braveheart for the colonial army. So the British were fleeing into these big redoubts, these big forts. They had built these during the first week of battle to let you know how long this battle had sort of been dragging out. Arnold wanted to break it, and so he followed them, literally with a sword. He's still whirling a saber in the air. He charges into the fort with his men behind him. They're dragging, like they don't exactly catch up with him. And a German soldier under the British command, they were all surprised when they saw him, by the way. He finds a gap, blows into this fortress, and they're all like, what the hell? Because they expected to just retreat and then regroup, and the polite Americans under Horatio Gates would just be like, oh, okay, let them go. So the Germans turn around, they're surprised, and one of them snaps off a shot, and it blows through Arnold's horse and his leg, which had already been shot earlier, and when the horse falls, it crushes his leg. So it's almost like fate wants that leg to be destroyed, and it got its way. Arnold said, quote, "I wish it had been my heart." And he said that after recovering in the limb box that we talked about in the first episode, his leg was 2 inches shorter forever.
Yeah, a limb box means he was held up in a casket for your leg. It's not modern day technology.
No, they don't have mesh plaster casts even. They're using a wooden box that is going to immobilize his leg for a while it almost heals.
Unsanitized surgery. So he was in so much pain. He said, you know what? I wish I would have went out.
Oh yeah, he's in agony the entire year. He's crippled and in a wheelchair while he's being put on trial by Joseph Reed. He doesn't know if he's ever going to walk properly again. He's recovering. His reputation is ruined, in part because he tries to be a political both-sideser. He tries to be nice to the Tories and make money while playing both sides. And he's just made too many enemies at this point.
And he's doing this all for America.
He starts off the war doing everything for America and giving everything for America, including his money, his time, his leg. But as things go on in Philadelphia and he tries to recoup the money Congress won't give him, like they won't give him back the loan, he doesn't turn traitor even yet. Like at this point in the story that we're covering, he does not turn traitor until Peggy Shippen, his new wife, hooks him up with somebody she knows named John Andre. But we're going to get to that. So even the part where I thought that Benedict turns traitor wasn't when it happens. It really is pretty late into the story. Why should we never, ever do what Arnold did? Like, when I'm talking about how he's like knee-jerk, tell the truth, say what you feel, confront your bosses, tell them you're going to punch them, run off and do whatever you want.
I'm going to do a disclaimer, and this is not saying that I'm a nice guy, but isn't telling the truth, Joe, just plain mean?
Yeah. It's the difference between, do you think I'm fat wearing these pants? Do you think telling the truth can be mean?
Well, Joe is a evaluator of speeches, and he's competed on a high level. And giving feedback a lot is telling the truth, right?
It is, yeah.
and it's sandwiching in a certain way. So
you have to start with positives.
Tell me your secrets first.
Well, you have to let them know that you want them to succeed and you're on their side. And no matter what they have delivered on, like whether it's a speech or a short story, they have done something right and they have done something you want to learn from and tell them about.
Why can't you just tell them? They're grown-ups, the truth. They want to get better. They hired you to make them better. Why can't you just tell them? Why do you have to sugarcoat it? Why do you have to soft sell it into them?
I don't think of it as sugarcoating, but you're right. If I was being more direct and I didn't, I was very worried about time, I might start out with what they can improve.
The problem is if you just tell them the truth right off, they're not going to listen.
Right.
And we have evolved a lot. It's just being cooperative individuals. Humans have. And we're not the only species that's cooperative. Many species, a lot of different ones, like us, have an extraordinary capacity to cooperate. And I'll give you an example. There's one, bats. Bats who have other bats who are starving to death will regurgitate blood to keep them alive. And then when they're starving, the bats return the favor.
Okay. So it's like a temporary cooperative altruism. You scratch my back or vomit blood into my mouth and I'll do the same for you tomorrow.
Now the non-flying bats, rats, do the same thing too. And if you've been helped by another rat, you were starving and it shared food with you or gave you a lead on some food to eat, you're more likely to do it when someone else is starving.
Holy rats share food?
You wouldn't think, right? You think them as pretty selfish things.
That is crazy. Does that mean Pizza Rat was actually taking that big slice back to like more than just himself?
Now, humans do all these things too. We share information. We talk about gossip. What percentage of gossip, Joe, do you remember is not negative?
Oh, I don't remember the exact number. It was high though. Like it was like 70% or something.
You're dead on. It was like 68, 70%. And so reputation is to show gossip. A good reputation is connecting with different groups. It's telling people you're in the know. And you want to go share something with a coworker or a friend in a group. So they'll share with you so you kind of get ahead socially. So
are you telling me that gossip and social grooming and cooperation, these all tie back to lying and social lubricant?
It is. People are not going to listen to you much like your evaluations, if you're too blunt, too honest, too upfront, too transparent.
Okay.
So it's important that you misrepresent yourself a bit so people will listen to you, so people will like you. And stick with me on this. I'm gonna finish this off.
Okay.
The problem is a liar, someone who tells mistruths, starts to believe this deception themselves. They start to believe this is actually true, even though they just lied. And what it looks like to me, it's like they're putting a gloss on it. So they're becoming like an actor and actresses and getting in character and playing this role out and seeing it all the way through because they've already represented themselves or what happened this way.
Okay. In your personal opinion, so when we talk about colleges teaching soft skills, I really do believe they in part teach you how to get along with groups, how to not lie, but present, get people on your side first, tell them that you want to work with them, and then you present how you think they're screwing up.
Well, in sales, we do that. It's called being agreeable.
Yeah.
If you just tell people they're wrong, there's different ways of handling that. First of all, the number one thing you learn if someone says something as an objection is you don't say, the higher level salespeople, you don't say anything. You say, oh, that's interesting. Even though you know, black and white, that's not true and that's not wrong. You don't want to confront them on that because they're going to turn off. They're going to put the sunglasses up.
Okay. So if Benedict Arnold had been socially agreeable like we're talking about, he might have gotten Horatio Gates on his side. He might have gotten the generals to listen to him. He should have showed up, said, hey, you look hungry. Let me vomit blood into your mouth. Now that I've fed you, you're doing a fantastic job. I like what you're doing here. Can I help with that left flank over there? I've got 3,000 men.
Yeah, let me help you, but not let me undermine you and embarrass you in front of everybody. I'm sure Gates didn't like this guy after this.
Right. Yeah, I got that sense. You don't feel that that's not being your authentic self? Like when you're not buttering people up when you do that?
Beware of the butter up. No, I do feel like that way. I value how my interactions with people and how they feel when they're with me. I want them to feel good. I want them to like me. So, we talked about being an actor and having different voices earlier in the previous episodes.
Right, code switching.
About different people in our lives, our voices, the language we use, if we swear, if we don't swear, how loud we talk. So I don't think it is dishonest. What do you think?
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around how we can fix Arnold. I have really gotten into, in this show, trying to fix historical stories so that they work out better. But if he had done it right, if he was going to be a little bit untruthful or use dishonesty instead of radical honesty, a good lie is, say, telling somebody you think they're doing an all right job. Here's how you might be able to improve a bit. A bad lie is, I'm amazing. I have won all these battles that you've never heard of. So a bad lie or a bad liar is somebody who lies about themselves and their own accomplishments and plays this role you're talking about. A good lie is trying to make yourself more agreeable, using gossip, using compliments, trying to make it seem like altruism.
I'm going to do it this week. I'm going to keep my computer open when I'm working and seeing what things I say during my workday and my personal life. We should all take it, because what's someone going to say? I hate liars. I never lie. Isn't that what a lot of listeners are going to say?
Right. That is. I'm with the listeners. That was my instinct when I started researching this. I literally went into this thinking, "Oh, radical honesty. I do that." And then I really started reading into it, and I was like, no, I don't. I give people too many compliments about the work they're doing creatively to get them to, to work with me so that we can both improve.
Well, I got a guy for you.
Okay.
There's a new movement. I don't know if you call it a religion or just a movement, but it's called radical honesty. And you touched on it in the narrative on our myths before, but the founder of it, his name is Brad Blanton.
No, not Jim Carrey.
Liar. That's a great movie, wasn't it?
It was. I thought that was a coincidence when I first saw Liar. That's not. The person who wrote Liar was basing it on Brad Blanton.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, this is his whole take. This is his thing. This is what this movement, radical honesty, is about. It's to live without lies. And he says you're going to have good times and you're going to have bad times, but you're not going to walk on, this is a direct quote, you're not going to be dancing on eggshells your whole fucking life.
Okay.
Now, this just sounds like some weirdo, right? In the middle of nowhere.
It sounds like somebody having a mental breakdown at a cocktail party where everybody is like being very dishonest.
Well, he's a 69-year-old psychotherapist. So he's an educated man and he's getting a following. But he says the world would just be better if there was just no more lies, no more fibs. And he says, even like the 3-year-old, when something pops in your brain, just shout it out.
Okay.
He thinks this is the only real path to authentic relationships.
So it's not just being honest, it is shouting out what little things you're thinking at the time?
Yeah, I don't think shouting is a good thing. Not the Tourette's, but just telling everybody exactly what you think.
Okay.
You look terrible in that, and it doesn't matter what the relationships are. He thinks that this whole thing of being polite all the time and not telling people the truth is kind of soul deadening. Now, on that, don't you know when somebody doesn't like you and they're in the room and you get kind of uncomfortable around them or a boss or whatever, don't you wish that you would just say it?
Yeah,
then that fake politeness kind of, it's lying, right? Pretending to kind of skirt around the fact that they just don't want you around. Now, this is what this article said. When they met Blanton, they were expecting just a weirdo, right? Kind of think of the crazy professor from Back to the Future kind of guy.
Yeah, I would expect him to be in a straitjacket.
But he's not. He's this big Texan guy with a big voice, very friendly, a great laugh. He pokes fun at himself. He calls himself the white trash with a PhD.
Okay.
So he's a pretty cool cat. And his movement, it's not the biggest thing in the world. It's not huge. He sold over 175,000 books in 11 languages. And now he has 15 of his goons out there doing training, doing workshops.
Okay.
So you can go to a workshop, let's say you're in Atlanta or Detroit, and learn how to not lie.
Learn radical honesty.
I think it'd be hard. I think it would take some training.
I would be shot by somebody who asked for a review of a short story or speech. Like, I would get one... I'll demonstrate radical honesty real quick here. I'm at a speech. Somebody gives their presentation, and I start with, I was bored through 75% of that. I felt myself nodding off and wishing I could go cook food. And then I started daydreaming about something I want to write later. And then I came back to your speech around the end, and I didn't have any feelings by the end of it. And then I would start telling them how to fix it. But by then, they would have loaded a shotgun.
Well, what do you share and what you don't? There is a line between being inappropriate. Men think about sex every 3 minutes, right? So what if we talked about every sexual thing we thought of?
Did Blanton do that? Brad Blanton, was he outward about even sex stuff?
He didn't talk about that, but that's just saying if we're saying whatever's on our mind.
Okay.
This is just some pushback.
I was, when we were preparing this episode, I skimmed the wiki for some of the people who have interviewed them, and they all talk about how, like, they come away thinking that this is going to adversely affect their sexual relationships, that if you are, like, attracted to somebody's sister, you say it out loud.
You tell them everything. And this is what they found. The radical honesty people who've had the best benefits from it say, when you start being honest with other people, they start being more honest with you.
Okay.
So you can have real, authentic, deeper relationships than this walking on eggshells, worried about what everybody thinks, being agreeable that I'm soft selling over here.
You've heard the term entrenching? You talk politics or you talk like religion or something, and you immediately offend their sensibilities or what they believe, and they entrench. Like it's the term for they dig a trench, they jump in it, they stand behind it, and they just wait for you to stop talking. Do you think practicing radical honesty is more likely to make people entrench, like to defend themselves, rather than open them up, get them to be honest back?
Absolutely. And this is what the person who wrote this, I mean, it's going to be in our show notes, so you can click to the link on this. The writer who actually went out and tried this as research for this article, it said it was really hard. And what happened was the excitement of the newness of it. You know, it's exciting to just tell people what you think. You're kind of telling people off all day, right?
Oh yeah, I would feel like Tony Stark at a dinner party. I would just be like, yeah, tear people down if you feel like it, or the thrill of telling them what you actually think.
But we're not really conditioned for it, Joe. And a life of real radical honesty is filled with so many confrontations every day. I mean, they might not be huge ones, but they're relentless. They just keep coming. Exhausting. How many fights can you be in a day?
-3. I avoid them so hard. I try to be in the negative.
Now, surveys have shown, independent survey, we have a survey here that says 9 out of 10 Americans admit that they lie regularly, habitually. Okay, 93% of people lie at work. And 35% of the population cheat on their spouse. So this radical honesty hasn't taken over yet.
Right, I'm thinking a nation with radical honesty is a nation that has been kicked out of the house and had their clothes set on fire. At least we basically know that in a historical context, if you are radically honest, you get into those confrontations. And some of them are with generals who don't like you and lawyers who will later, prosecute you for being the traitor of America. If you don't mind talking a little bit more about Benedict Arnold, Do you want to discuss when he actually did turn traitor?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to go through 3 episodes talking about how awesome Arnold was and never actually get to the point where, like, he switches sides.
Joe started working on this article. It's supposed to be a one episode. And he got so geeked out on this story. I mean, almost like a historian who's found the missing, who wants to defend him. So it's been fun to do on this show with you, Joe.
This has been, the reason why I've been narrating the last 3 episodes, for anyone wondering, it's because I got so into the micro details of when Arnold turned traitor, what the court decisions were, who was prosecuting. I got so into this, I kind of took over the project, and Todd let me sort of go off on my own sort of on this.
He lied to me to make it seem like it was my idea. He didn't say, I'm better at this. This is too complicated for you. He worded it in a way that could be seen as deceitful.
I have not started Radical Honesty yet. That's next week. So next week I'll be like, Todd, this is over your head. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. If you are sitting around and you're on page 8 of detailed notes about court cases for a historical figure, you're the only one who's going to be interested. Just letting you know. So I mentioned that Benedict Arnold was still sort of saying, to put it in a phrase, a internet phrase, Arnold said it like it was, like he was keeping it real. He pissed off a lot of people. He was radically honest, it seemed like, in person, and he would tell higher-ups when he thought they were incompetent. Now, he met a woman named Peggy Shippen. He kept trying to get married to people who were a bit too young to modernize. He did meet Peggy Shippen when she was like 17. She turned 18 when he asked for her hand. Like, he knew her before then and was courting her before then. At first, Peggy Shippen's father said no. She was attractive. She was young. Peggy's father was a Tory. He was basically friendly with the British. And Arnold was fighting for America. So it was sort of you're not a good fit. You're older and you're a militiaman. So what are you doing here? But eventually he did sort of woo Peggy, and he won Peggy's father over to his side. What he didn't know, or at least what he wasn't quite aware of, is Peggy had ties to a guy named John Andre. John Andre was a British officer who had sort of like courted Peggy a bit and was friendly with her and traded information and letters with her. So Arnold met her while he was broke, like his finances were rocky, and there were the looming court charges against him because those were being drug out for a year. So he kind of walks in, stumbles backwards into her machinations with John Andre, and when they get hitched, she brings that with. So Arnold bought a place he couldn't afford, Mount Pleasant. It was just a gorgeous mansion, huge, palatial, very expensive, so well known and expensive that the public held this against him. They're like, you are obviously corrupt. You're buying Mount Pleasant. But what they didn't see on the surface, because this is finances and a gentleman does not disclose finances, he immediately rented it out. Like in 1779, he bought Mount Pleasant so that he would have something to impress Peggy's father with, but he rented it to like the next day he rented it out.
He's like juggling his reputation and his wealth. He's trying to look like a hotshot.
He is.
It's tough, man. I feel for that.
He's rolling around in carriages like he is literally trying to play up how much money he has.
Rich people problems.
Yeah.
I bought this mansion and I can't even live in it. Oh.
Right. But a lot of it is sort of an act. Like he is desperately setting up the kind of life that Peggy and her father would be impressed with.
I totally get this. I've gone all in before.
Yeah. Oh, he's all in. If this didn't end with death and traitorism, this would be a romantic comedy. And this is funny because every part of this, the public, they held it against him. They held his carriages, his servants. They held it all against him because right before this, British nobility and British officers were known for being extravagant and living large and showing it off.
That's what I was going to say. He was in the top of his field, and all of his people in his positions had that similar wealth and showed it.
Right.
Why was it not okay for him to do it?
And many other generals were doing the exact same. American generals were doing the exact same. It is actually during this war and right after. In fact, part of it is his destroyed reputation and him being painted as this live large, spend all your money, steal from America. They use him to make Americans more sort of frugal. So after Arnold and after this war, Americans become the humble sort of salt of the earth people that we like to be seen as, where even if you're rich, you still sort of see yourself as being reasonable with your money. That is not a fad until right now with Arnold.
So he was shamed. He was this public image for just
absolutely
gluttony and excess. And
ironically, we covered in the last episode that Congress made it sort of their go-to to revoke, Tory and loyalist lands and money. And they're kind of crapping on Arnold for buying something he can't afford, a mansion for Peggy. So Peggy introduces him to John Andre. Congress is making his life miserable. Joseph Reed is witch hunting him. And she basically says, hey, I've got this friend who's a British officer. They don't set up a traitor or a scheme to steal West Point yet. It's just she's like, hey, I know a British guy, and we trade letters. It's nothing, no big deal. We just talk once in a while. I mentioned that being a hero did not buy Arnold any favors from Congress. In fact, when Congress decided to create a hero of Saratoga, which is the battle that he charged into the back of a fortress and got his leg shot off or crushed during. He led that charge and led to a grander victory there and disobeyed Horatio Gates to do it. That's exactly who they labeled as the hero of Saratoga. They cast a medal for Horatio Gates, calling him the hero of Saratoga, even though Arnold's the one that led that charge and disobeyed Gates to do it.
And took the bullet and was permanently crippled from it.
Right, exactly.
You think someone at your job takes credit for something.
Right. And while this is going on, I mentioned Joseph Reed is doing this sort of hatchet job on him. We mentioned before that Reed may have been a traitor first. There was a general, John Cadwalader, who publicly accused Reed of being a fair weather supporter of America and called his performance in the military weak. Remember I mentioned that he was at battles and he was hailed as being, a militiaman like anybody else. He did not practice radical honesty. When we talk about somebody who gossips to earn favor, he did that. In fact, he did that against Washington. He talked shit behind Washington's back and famously got caught doing so. In 1784, Reed visited England. Then he got elected to Congress immediately when he came back. So he was stoking, he was basically running a campaign while he was in England and then came back to his position there. When war broke out, there were questions of Reed's loyalty because he took vacations near the British line. And by vacations, I mean he was accused of planning to switch sides as soon as things went badly for America. Here's the most damning piece at all. People say that, Benedict Arnold, his Peggy Shippen, his new wife, her having ties to the British was black-hearted and that was, a traitor in the making. How dare she? But Joseph Reed's wife was British. She tried very, very hard to support the American cause. Joseph Reed's wife sewed uniforms and organized supplies, but her sewing uniforms and Joseph Reed hanging Quakers to prove how American they were that very much could have been an act. In fact, Joseph Reed publishing his own accounts of like how he rejected bribes and things like that, that all feels very suspicious to me. Promotional. Yeah, everything I read about Joseph Reed seems like a PR campaign, and it's well executed. Everything I read about Benedict Arnold, it feels like radical honesty. It feels like he was not keeping anything in when he would, tell people what he thought.
How many uniforms did you sew, right?
Right.
Just this one for the media.
The pictures.
Yeah, just for the pictures. Hold it like this.
Right.
Now, this whole reputation thing, I can't help but think because of the time of this country, one of my favorite Americans of all time is Ben Franklin. So when everyone's supposed to be so thrifty, he's prancing around mansion to mansion, spending money in Europe, drinking with women and wine.
He's with French prostitutes, spending, tons of money.
And proud of it and advertising it. Why is he not the one why is it Benedict Arnold?
I think it's because he was the governor of Pennsylvania at the time. Like he was in the public's eye, he was the face of the people taking their money.
He was a better politician.
Right. Yeah, Ben Franklin had he lied in a productive way, let's say. So that kind of brings us hopefully to our next point. If I lie like Ben Franklin, or if I lie more like Joseph Reed, where I use gossip and I use intent and I use it to get on people's side, do I win bigger in my life than somebody who practices radical honesty?
And that's what it's all about. Who wins in the end?
Yeah, who has more money at the end, right?
Honest people or the liars, the scoundrels? And why are we going to be honest if it pays to not be honest?
Right. If you're going to be super honest, radically honest, and you end up being hanged as a traitor, what's the point?
Well, honesty is a moral choice. It's an ethic. It's one of your ethics, one of your core values. And business people tell themselves that if I do things the right way, if I use my good values, over time people will trust me. It'll be good for my business. Now, we choose virtue to be honest so people will be close to us, will trust us, will respect us, will support us. But what the studies have shown is when it comes down to the money part, if you have to pick money or morals, people most of the time push the money button.
Okay. My folks kind of taught me not to do that. Like if you're given the choice between morals and money, literally that's something we teach our kids, which is, choose honesty. People who cheat and people who use underhanded politics and lies, they always get theirs in the end. Like they get their comeuppance, they're not rewarded.
Just like the after school specials.
Right.
What do we say? Tell the truth, it's easier to remember.
I hope this is the part in the podcast where you tell me that we're all better off being Brad Blanton or Benedict Arnold, and we should tell the truth because we're richer at the end of our life for it.
There's two different buckets here. For your personal life, your love life, and your friendships, which we both believe is the most important thing in your life. It's important to be honest because that's going to align you with people who are also honest, who have the same values as you. But on the business side, there are a lot of examples of people thinking if I just do good business, people will trust me, people will buy more things from me, but that's not really the case. There's case after case after case where cheating and lying pays off. And I'll give you a few examples. There's millions of them, but I'll give you a few. This is a big one. Do you remember the Exxon Valdez disaster?
Yes, the giant oil spill.
Well, these oil companies, or 7 of them, went to this small town of Valdez and talked them into doing a tanker terminal, and claimed that the chance of an accident was highly unlikely. And they prepared this big book, I think of an OSHA book, like 1,800 pages of what would happen if there was a disaster. But everything in that book, 1,800 pages, was all bullshit. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have any of those things. So we know that the natural disaster that cost billions of lives and, ruined all these, killed all these animals, ruined species.
Everything in that book was something they couldn't do. Some poor safety advisor was writing that phone book for nothing.
Yeah, it's disgusting, right? And this one's even better. So when the U.S. Post Office, every year they expose fake charities. And so they go to these people who have been ripped off by these charities, some of them for years, and say, hey, we found this, don't send them money anymore. The people get pissed off, Joe. They're mad, they're annoyed, and that they can't keep sending contributions to a cause that they believe in, even though they know it's fraud.
Okay, so
piles of money, thousands of letters saying, what do you mean they're closed? We want to give money to a kid with cancer, even though the U.S. Post says you're being ripped off.
Okay.
So people like to be lied to.
Okay, so I want to sort of unpack a little bit of what you just said there. We have had in previous episodes covered that honesty makes you healthier. That it doesn't tax your body, tax your mind as much. If you have a choice, you personally, Todd, you would pick radical honesty, or at least something approaching radical honesty for friends and family, but in your business life you would choose I hope you're not going to say you would choose Exxon levels of lie.
No, not that bad. I don't want to kill a bunch of birds and seals and stuff, but
more like the bats and the gossipers, you would be willing to show cooperation.
Well, when I had my own business, a construction company in Seattle years before, my business partner, I said, well, as we both identify as Christians, so I said we should put Christian, that fish, and put that we're Christians in all our advertising. And my partner said, why do we have to do that? Why don't we just show people on the way we act and how we do business? So that should show if you have to go out and pump up your chest and say, oh, look, this is proof that I'm a...
Have you ever given a bad review to a bad business online, like a local one?
Yeah, through the years, here and there, a few.
I am desperately clawing my brain to try to throw an example back at you where I'm like, no, honesty matters in business. But now I'm thinking about the only way I can think that it does. If you get a bad review and you're a Tide Pod distributor on Amazon, if your reviews all come back bad because you lie about your business, your Tide Pods don't do anything, it's just food coloring in a tiny plastic container, then you just make a new website and a new business. You literally shell your business, or you change names or whatever. There's always restarting. I think the only time in business you can't do that is when you have too much at stake, or you have a brick and mortar. Like if you go to a local teriyaki shop here in town, you give them a bad review online. They tell you they're going to bring you a huge meal. It comes with all these things. They give you a pair of chopsticks and a simple bowl of rice. You take that to a review and you can crush them. You can literally reduce their business by 9% per review or something like that. So I'm trying to come up with a rebuttal to you siding with not being a liar in business, but being
morally bankrupt, maybe
tactful, Machiavellian. Let's go with that.
Well, let's just go with this. It hasn't gotten me anywhere.
Okay.
All the doing the right things. When I think through my business experiences, I struggled with a construction business where I was in over my head financially, and my cash flow got to be a problem. And I did everything I could to pay the employees, the advertising, the leasing, everything except for myself, and tried to do the right thing by not going bankrupt. And ended up painting 100 people's houses for free.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I know the pain of it sometimes. And I don't know if that's an honesty thing or a business thing, so I'm struggling with this. So I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna take inventory of my own life and see how much I'm lying now and how much I can. And I'm gonna try to cut it out. I'm not gonna be like these people who say I never lie. Everybody lies.
Okay.
Make a list, and I'm gonna try to cut mine down by 50%. I challenge you to try to do the same.
For my own health in my own social life, I will try to do some level of radical honesty. But I agree with you in business and in professional life. There's no such thing as radical honesty. I don't believe it.
I was at a meeting yesterday with a sales manager of a car dealership, and he's a very successful. He's been at this dealership for 25 years, a very established guy, and he said something that cracked me up. He said, I'm insulted if other salespeople don't lie to me a little bit. And that's what he's saying. He wants to embellish. He wants to show. He wants the sizzle of the steak.
Right.
If they don't do that, and then they hit you high, and then you think the truth is somewhere, you measure it.
Right.
About 50% less than what they're saying. But if you could get that much out of what they're telling you, hey, maybe you still do it.
Coming from a creative background, if somebody doesn't seem enthusiastic about the story they're trying to get me on board with editing or looking over, I won't be enthusiastic about it either. So I'm going to say I'm with you on that one. Do you want to sort of get to where this radical honesty served Arnold? Like, sort of
6 days, 6 hours later.
Right. we will wrap this up in a bow.
We are not doing any more American Revolutionary episodes.
No, we're not. Well,
maybe
this is
Ben
where
Franklin. We might do one Ben Franklin because he's just such a scoundrel.
Okay, well, maybe Ben Franklin. This is where radical honesty got Arnold. Arnold sent his last appeals to Washington. Arnold warned Washington what he was going to do. Again, Arnold, when he betrayed America, he didn't quote-unquote betray America. He had a stake in the Charming Nancy, a ship that he allowed to leave port during lockdown because he had money riding on its cargo. But he had seen other generals like Philip Schuyler mix military dealings with business too. And Michael Troy from the American Revolution podcast, and I love the way he says this. He says, to Arnold, it just looked like it was his time at the trough. It wasn't illegal. It was gray, but it was not illegal, and that lockdown he was ordered to do it. And he got himself appointed to West Point around the time Peggy Shipman is introducing Arnold to John Andre. He asks for a position after the trial, after he's found guilty of these 2 minor charges. That's the thing that caught me by surprise reading this. History class in high school glazed over the point where Arnold was basically found guilty, but of very minor things. He very could have easily walked away from these charges. He was found guilty of having money on the Charming Nancy and letting it leave port, but that wasn't his betrayal of America. He was sick. He was angry. The trial was over. He could have easily returned to business as usual. He could have returned to being a merchant. But instead, he asked for a position at West Point, which is a new military fort, new college that's being established, and he arranges to sell the information to the British about West Point. He started weakening West Point's defenses, and then when he goes to pass on that information to John Andre, he's a British major, John Andre, Arnold didn't screw up. Like he for all intent and purposes, he managed it. He did everything right, like he pretty much always has. It was John Andre who got captured and hanged as a spy. The British hated it because John Andre was a very popular man. And so Arnold fled to the British's side. Like he had to run away basically in the night and escape to the British. Benedict Arnold switches sides. He becomes a British officer, even though he wasn't taken seriously because he was blamed for the failure of capturing West Point, not John Andre. And they gave him the rank of Brigadier General, which is, ironically, 1 grade below his Continental Army rank. So again, he's passed over for promotion and busted down. As he tries to incorporate into British society. So, as we mentioned in the opening of this, George Washington sends out a spy to try to recapture him. The spy fails. Arnold joins British society. So, this is something else that I missed from history class. Arnold basically gets away and retires. Like, he is snubbed by British society. They think he's a failure. They think he is a mercenary, not a real patriot of either side. But Peggy Shipman, the woman who introduced him to John Andre, she gets them accepted. Like, she's just so charming and cute, and she's got ties to the British, and she is really good at throwing a party and hobnobbing. She tells these little social niceties. She is great at gossiping. She's good at all the things Arnold isn't. Arnold is great at radical honesty, and he's been labeled a traitor for it. Peggy Shipman is amazing at telling people, you look nice in that uniform. Have you lost 10 pounds?
Oh, yeah, no, she's good. She's trying to sell this guy, this traitor, to both sides. He's limping through the party, complaining about his back.
Right.
I mean, he's a tough sell, and he's always whining in all his letters.
And he's like, and then I told Horatio Gates, you're a bumbling fool, and I broke through the lines and killed a bunch of your people. So anyway, British parties have got to be weird with him at it.
And Peggy's like, honey, go get me a drink and let me finish this story for you.
Right.
So it's safe to say she may have told some exaggerations or...
Oh, absolutely. And this came through. Like, this was evident. Socially accepted, but he still got turned down during peacetime once the war ended. He applied to be in the East India Company, and they say the purity of his conduct was in question. And again, they called him a mercenary. So he became a merchant again, and he would eventually die living in London in 1801. He was 60 years old, and he was buried without military honors because the British saw him as a mercenary, not a military man.
You know, I didn't know this story, and I guess I thought he would have, being the traitor that he was, get his comeuppance and hung.
Right.
Right?
I guess
an unmarked grave somewhere that no one really knows exactly where it is. There's theories, but...
Right. There's a grave for him, and there's still a grave for his leg at the battle that he lost it at. So he ended up all right. Like, he wasn't great. He was still bitter. He hated Congress. I want to read this little quote from Time magazine. Quote, Arnold consistently maintained that he defected to save America from an ineffective Congress, a cause that had lost its way, and a bloody, protracted civil war. So yeah, even to the end, he didn't see himself as a traitor. He saw himself as having had a fought with Congress and lost against a money-grubbing body of state representatives. A lot of the historians that I was reading about, and we'll have all of their links in our article because they're all great, they basically agree with the same sort of flow of this, which is, at the end of it, Arnold wasn't so much a great traitor of the American Revolution, but he sure as hell galvanized Congress at the end of it. Because when Washington and Congress went on their little parade, their anti-Arnold, burn his effigies in the street, it reminded everybody that they just almost lost the war to one man. If they had lost West Point, or if they had lost Ticonderoga early on and all those cannons Benedict Arnold had captured, Arnold is one of those, like, take him out of history and we immediately lose America kind of people. He tied everybody with his betrayal back together. So his radical honesty and his traitorism really made us galvanize as a nation. To cooperate is human, and to trick people into cooperating with us by telling a good lie or spinning a convincing yarn, that might be even more human than the cooperation part. Living an honest life will make you healthier. Be honest, and you'll live longer. You'll enjoy better relationships, and retire with more money. Radical honesty, on the other hand, maybe not so much. Telling the truth, blatantly and boldly, no matter who it hurts, might be exciting at first. But even Blanton admits it can earn you professional scorn, and it won't save relationships. Radical honesty is, at its core, the most well-meaning way to introduce thousands of micro-conflicts into your life. Radical honesty is telling your parents you're bored of hearing their old rambling stories. Radical honesty is telling your boss you resent being dragged into meetings. It's telling your commanding officer you've got traitorous impulses. Or admitting to your superiors you think they're buffoons and you can do their job better. Radical honesty is letting your enemy know they're getting under your skin. Our world is built for casual honesty and clever stories. When our way gets blocked socially, maybe we should try honesty first, to open that door with sincerity and maybe the occasional white lie. When that doesn't work, go ahead and pick it with cleverness. And if you have to lie, lie with good intentions in your heart. No, dear, that dress doesn't make you look fat.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We appreciate feedback. We love spirited debates. And for all of you about to correct our Revolutionary War facts, bring it, please.
We love to lie. We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.